Want to talk chips? All right, let's talk chips. But like the really important ones, ASML. They're the ones everyone's watching because, well, they're tech.
Yeah.
It's basically calling the shots for like everything. Faster phones, smarter cars, you name it.
It's true, they've got a grip on the future with this thing called EUV lithography.
EUV.
Catchy.
Right. Imagine like a crazy precise projector, but instead of showing movies, it's etching circuits onto silicon.
Yeah.
The circuits that make those chips insanely powerful. And ASML, they're the only ones who can make the really, really advanced ones.
So everyone needs them.
Everyone. Which makes their whole Q3 report, well, a bit of a nail-biter.
Yeah, their financials were solid, right? Beat sales expectations, sitting on a, what was it, a 36 billion euro backlog of orders.
Yep, 36 billion.
Yeah.
With a B. But here's the thing. Their future outlook, let's just say investors are a tad nervous.
That's putting it mildly. I mean, strong Q3, but they downgrade their 2025 revenue outlook. That's going to make some waves, which is what we're diving into today, right now. Absolutely. We've got the Q3 earnings call transcript, that video interview their CFO did, and the investor slides. Charts galore.
Oh, you know it's serious when the charts come out.
We're talking the good, the bad, and the potentially revolutionary, all when it comes to the future of chips.
All right, so before we dive into the doom and gloom, what's got ASML riding high this quarter?
DUV systems. Essentially, it's their older tech. Not as flashy as the EUV stuff, but still super important.
So, like, not everything has to be a supercomputer.
Exactly. DV handles the rest. Sensors, power management, you know, the less glamorous but essential stuff.
Yeah.
And the demand is clearly still there.
So it's not always about being the shiniest, newest thing. Sometimes reliable gets the job done.
And here's the thing, their maintenance business for those DUV systems, booming. More systems out there, more maintenance, steady revenue stream.
A nice bonus on top of those billion-euro orders. But speaking of the really high-end stuff, they've got those new EUV machines everyone's buzzing about, right? The ones needed for the truly next-level chips.
You're talking about the machines that are enabling, well, almost everything. Advanced AI, self-driving cars, the works. And yeah, they're doing incredibly well. But the really exciting part is the performance of their high-NA machines.
Okay, time for a quick tech breakdown. High-NA. For those of us who don't speak fluent chip, what's the big deal?
Imagine taking today's most powerful chip and making it even smaller, faster, more efficient. It's not just an upgrade. It's like a whole new level of processing power. Think about how far smartphones have come. High-NA is that next giant leap.
Okay, so we've got strong financials, a huge backlog of orders, and this insanely advanced tech that's blowing everyone's mind. So why the sudden concern over their 2025 outlook?
That's the million-dollar question. And there are a few key factors. Let's start with China. They're a big player in the chip market, as you can imagine. ASML is being, well, cautious about relying too heavily on their demand.
Which, given the whole trade tension situation, makes sense.
Right. Plus, remember a while back when China went on that chip buying spree?
Stocked up big time.
Exactly. They're still working through all that, so their demand is naturally cooling off for now.
So it's not just geopolitics, it's also the natural ebb and flow of supply and demand. But China's not the whole story, is it? What about the rest of the world?
The global chip market recovery, the one everyone was banking on, it's being a bit slower than everyone expected.
People not buying as many gadgets.
Part of it, demand for things like phones, PCs, those big chip consumers, it's still kind of sluggish. And when those markets slow down, the effects ripple outward.
Because those are the companies buying ASML's machines in the first place.
Exactly. And when their products aren't flying off the shelves as quickly, they put the brakes on building new factories, which then impacts demand for ASML's equipment. It's a chain reaction.
So it's global economic uncertainty, slower than expected recovery in electronics. Anything else feeding into this whole ASML puzzle?
One more piece, and this is where it gets interesting. ASML called it competitive foundry dynamics.
Pretty catchy. What's that mean in plain English?
Basically, even the chip makers who did build new factories, they're having a tough time finding enough clients to fill them up.
So it's not just about being able to make the chips. It's about having enough buyers lined up for when they come out of the factory.
Precisely. And building one of these bleeding-edge chip factories, huge investment. If those factories aren't cranking at full speed, those chip makers, they're going to be hesitant to buy more EUV machines from ASML. It's a chicken and egg situation.
It makes you realize just how interconnected this industry is. One hiccup in demand can have ripple effects throughout the entire thing.
Exactly. Which brings us right back to ASML's revised outlook for 2025. They're projecting revenue of about 30 to 35 billion euros.
Which is lower than they initially predicted.
Right.
And that has everyone on edge.
It's all about managing expectations. But here's where it gets really interesting. Remember that comment from the CFO about ASML being basically fully booked for the lower end of that 2025 guidance?
Yeah. Definitely raised an eyebrow when I heard that one. What's that mean, really? Trying to sound confident, or is there something more to it?
It's a strategic message for sure. They're basically saying, worst case scenario, we're still going to be just fine.
Right. Reassuring for investors, but also a little bold, given everything we've been talking about.
It's a calculated risk, no question. But there's another layer to this whole thing. Remember we talked about ASML's plans to expand their production capacity?
Right. Even with the slowdown, they're still pushing for growth. Seemed a little counterintuitive.
It's a long game they're playing. They're basically saying, we think demand will catch up, even if it's a bit slower than we thought.
And they're that confident. I mean, we just went through a whole laundry list of reasons why chip makers are hitting the pause button.
Here's the thing. The long-term drivers of chip demand, AI, the need for data, the amount of processing power, and everything these days, it's only going up.
So they're looking past this little blip and betting big on the future.
They're betting this slowdown is temporary and that when demand comes back, they'll be ready.
Short-term pain for potentially huge long-term gains.
You could say that. Risky move, no doubt. If demand doesn't come back like they're expecting, that's a lot of expensive equipment sitting idle.
But if their bet pays off,
They become the kingmaker. They're the ones who determine the speed of innovation in the entire semiconductor industry.
that's a lot of power for one company.
Which is why everyone's watching their every move. Their decisions impact everything.
All right, so we've covered China being cautious, chip makers pumping the brakes a bit, ASML playing 4D chess with their production. But let's circle back to something a bit more concrete. High-NA machines. We touched on them earlier, but I want to dig a little deeper. What do they mean beyond just making chips a bit faster, a bit smaller?
Now you're thinking like a true innovator. This is about more than just incremental improvements. We could be talking about a fundamental shift in what chips can do.
Give me goosebumps here. We're hitting the limits of silicon as we know it. Heat, power consumption. The laws of physics are basically yelling at us to stop. What if High-NA lets us bypass all that?
Quantum computing, chips that mimic the human brain, things that used to sound like science fiction.
Right, and with High-NA, it's not science fiction anymore. And from everything in the reports, it's working even better than anyone expected.
Definitely something to keep an eye on. It could completely change the tech landscape as we know it.
This whole deep dive has been wild. China, chip makers, ASML making huge bets, and High-NA waiting to change everything. What happens now? It's like watching a high-stakes poker game, but in slow motion.
And ASML's holding all the cards.
They're playing the long game, huh?
Long game, big bets. They're betting demand explodes and everyone who played it safe is left scrambling to catch up.
That's got to be the takeaway for anyone listening, right? Whether you're a tech whiz or just someone who uses a smartphone, this isn't just some industry drama.
This is about the future, plain and simple. The future of innovation.
Who gets to decide what that looks like?
Exactly. If ASML's right and demand for these high-end chips goes through the roof, well, they're the ones calling the shots.
Deciding which companies get to innovate.
And which ones get left behind. Think about it'd be like controlling the supply of, I don't know, picks and shovels during a gold rush?
Except in this case, the gold is...
Data, algorithms, all the stuff that's going to drive the next decade of tech.
So yeah, headlines might scream slowdown, but it's way more complicated than that.
ASML's playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers.
And they're not afraid to make a big move or two, even if it makes everyone else a little nervous.
They're betting on the future, betting on innovation.
So what does all this mean for, well, everyone else? The people who aren't glued to earnings calls?
Pay attention. Because what these companies are doing today, companies like ASML, it's going to impact all of us.
The phones we use, the cars we drive, how we work.
How we learn.
Everything. The future is being written in silicon.
And ASML's got the pen.
This has been an eye-opening deep dive. Really makes you think.
Cautious optimism from China. Chip makers tapping the brakes. ASML making power moves. And then there's High-NA waiting in the wings to potentially change everything.
It's a lot.
It is. But that's tech, isn't it? Never a dull moment.
And we'll be here to break it all down, which is what we do with these deep dives. Cut through the noise, give you the insights you need to understand what's really going on.
We've covered a lot of ground today, but this is really just the beginning of the story, this capacity conundrum. It's far from over.
Will ASML's gamble pay off? Or are they going to end up with a bunch of fancy equipment and no one to buy it?
We'll have to wait and see.
We'll be watching.
And we'll be back to break it all down, right here on the Deep Dive.
Until then, keep those chips up.